Library of Alexandria has a pretty interesting story, and is obviously a pretty strong card. Or a very strong card. You could say it's a bit washed these days, but just a bit. It's still an extremely playable card, at least in the formats it's allowed to be played in, which is basically just Vintage, Canadian Highlander, and some variants of Old School. Hell, I think there's a couple of Old School variants that let you play 4 copies of it. That being said, I think the most fascinating thing to talk about with Library of Alexandria is its development. So let's get started and talk about Library of Alexandria. Library of Alexandria is a land that you can tap to add a colorless mana. Or you can tap it to draw a card. You can only activate this ability if you have exactly 7 cards in hand. So that's really fucking busted. But if you don't understand what the big deal is, I wouldn't blame you too hard. A lot of players didn't realize how good this card was when you might actually see a copy of it at a game store. Not all players, mind you. This was nicknamed the Power 10 for a reason. Heavily invested players were well aware of how strong this card is. Also, another fun little fact. When this card was playable, and by playable I mean reasonably possible to acquire, Player 1 drew a card on their first turn. So there was like zero downside to this card at all. You could just slap this baby down, not play anything, and first turn on the play, this thing was ready to draw you double the cards that your opponent would have access to. That's insane. This card is so fucking strong. The game was also a lot slower back then. Library of Alexandria only falters in its power when the game relies on like Force of Will and similar cards for player 2 to even get the chance to play. And it's not like it's unplayable in that environment. This card still sees some vintage play, and is still restricted there. And I would assume anyone with a copy of it is playing it in Canlander unless they just don't want to. But we all know how strong drawing a card is, and putting it on a land is kind of insane. Also, this doesn't really have to do with much, but it is infinitely funny to me that Library of Alexandria taps for a mana. You know, just in case you need that. And it's in the same set as Island of Walk Walk and Diamond Valley. 2 cards that are way more niche and harder to justify playing that cannot tap for mana. This is Magic the Gathering as Richard Garfield intended, because Arabian Nights was designed pretty much exclusively by him. As the story goes, Magic sold out instantaneously, and the expansion sets they had planned were nowhere near ready for production. So Peter Adkinson, the CEO and founder of Wizards of the Coast, asked Richard Garfield to throw together a set as quickly as possible. This is actually why Arabian Nights was the setting used. Richard could focus his time on mechanical balance and not really worry about telling a story or developing a setting. You know, he didn't have to do any world building. So he just reread the Arabian Nights and made a list of things he could represent as cards and then designed the cards. The entire set was made and produced within a couple of months, and the entire process was rushed as hell. I think it was like Beverly Sailing or somebody. I'll probably put text that says it, but all of the flavor text for the set was written and put onto the cards in one day. That's how quickly everything moved. And the only development and balancing that this set received was all done by Joel Mick and Scaff Elias, who were just basically emailed a list of every card and what they did. There wasn't any time to playtest at all, and the cards were basically just vibe tested. Interestingly, Library of Alexandria was one of the few cards that was actually nerfed. In the article Better Late Than Never by Scaff Elias, Scaff details what he remembers of the development of Arabian Nights. The article is short and sparse on details, but to Scaff's credit, the article was posted in 2002, and that was like 10 years after the development of Arabian Nights. He talks about exchanging a few emails, and that was the entirety of the development, like at all. He says many of his comments went unheeded because nobody knew if the concerns were correct because there had been no playtesting. He did vividly remember Library of Alexandria though, and apparently, according to Scaff's memories of 10 years prior, it tapped to draw you a card when you had a low number of cards in hand. He couldn't remember if it was 0 cards or 1 card, but that effect is insane. Scaff describes the email discussion about Library as an intense argument, and they eventually compromised on the current version, which is admittedly weaker as there is a small amount of tension with the card. You do have to play more conservatively when trying to keep your library active, after all. Library of Alexandria is a cool card, but it is too strong for fair Magic. It's also incredibly rare. There's just one printing and the print run is minuscule. There are more Black Lotuses than Library of Alexandria is running around. Alright, I'm rambling a bit too much, and I don't think that I'll spend the time detailing every instance of how this card has been used throughout the history. It was pretty funny in standstill decks, and I think it's still in the Vintage Cube, at least the Magic Online version. But, yeah, it's a strong card, still sees some play in Vintage, and, you know, anywhere it's legal. It's pretty crazy good. Although, the game has kind of sped up past Library these days. Also, interestingly enough, despite only having one paper printing that's not oversized, we do have 3 different arts to discuss. So, let's talk about the art for a bit. The original art for Library of Alexandria was illustrated by Mark Poole, and this art is phenomenal, in my opinion. Mark Poole has so many great arts, but this one is especially cool for me. The sky in the back is fantastic, and the details everywhere are just very well done. The little people on the steps really ties the piece together for me. But I guess that's really all I have to say about it. It's a beautiful piece. Vintage Masters is a Magic Online exclusive set that has some really banger vintage staples in it, and Library of Alexandria is on that list. This piece was illustrated by Drew Baker, and it's also fantastic. I really appreciate the color choices, and the shading is fantastic. I am a sucker for original arts, but this one is not bad at all. I don't really have too much to say about it though, but just look at it, it's pretty nice. The last art to talk about only appears on an oversized card, but this version was illustrated by Volkan Baga. This piece is exquisite and extremely well executed. The details are fantastic, and it even has some homage to the original art. The people on the stairs really make this piece awesome, in my opinion, and it's probably the best execution of the 3. My heart still goes to the classic, but I can understand anyone that loves this piece more, as it has some awesome details in it. Library of Alexandria is a really interesting card, and there's honestly so much left to say about it and its interesting history, but this video is running a bit long and I do need to get a few more of these done so that there isn't a break while I'm gone over Thanksgiving. Actually, I think this might actually drop on Thanksgiving. Huh. Well, if you celebrate this holiday, happy Thanksgiving. But that's all I have to say today. You can like the video if you liked it. You can also subscribe if you give a shit. But either way, I hope you have a magical day.